Gamers, I'm Jason.
And I'm Julie, and today on Dice and Dragons, we're going to take you through our Kickstarter preview of Sanctuary. So Jason, want to tell them a little bit more about the game?
We're totally doing this out of order for those of you that watch the channel. You might have seen that little bit of a bewildered look on my face as she ran away with it. So yes, this is a Kickstarter preview. We have been compensated for this video. Now, let's tell you a little bit about the game. It is designed by Leonardo Romano with art by Andrea Butera and Camille Alquier, as well as Mana Project Studio. Now, I mentioned the art because that is a big feature of the game, and I think it's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. We're going to discuss the game a little bit more. Now, what will you be doing in the game? Maybe Julie should tell us a little bit about what we'll be doing in the game.
Well, how about I tell you what kind of game it is?
Yes, why don't you do that? And then I'll take it back.
There you go. It's a competitive card game, fast-paced, that plays 1 to 2 players. Jason will go into that a little bit more. It's intended for ages 13 and above and should play in about 15 to 30 minutes.
Yes. So, how is it 1 to 2 players? Well, there are some solo cards. We did get them in the prototype, however, we are working off of version 0.3 of the rulebook, which does not include the solo rules, so we'll not be commenting on it, but after the Kickstarter, you will be able to play it solo. The game is a competitive game where it's sort of set up like a MOBA style. There are 4 sanctuaries that you must defend. They are the heart of your faction in this world that was once full and rife with essence. Essence has now become a precious resource. You must defend your sanctuary and defeat the other factions. Now, how does it work on the lane? Well, you've got your sanctuaries here. There's an attack and a defensive position. It's the same for your opponents. What you are going to be doing is taking your turns, resolving your attack phase while you're summoning units first, also using rituals, essentially spells, to potentially destroy other units or shift the favor of battle onto your side. Now, with that being said, I think I've talked enough about the game. What time is it now, Julie?
Well, it's time to grab our drinks.
I think we're going to have to stare each other down this time because we're not best friends in this scenario.
No, we're competitors here. Yeah, take it to the table.
I'm going to take it to the table. I will defeat you.
Probably.
Now we're going to take a look at the components for Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. The factions in front of us represent the lands of Dusk. What we will do is take a look at each champion. This is Nomar of the Mulren. We've got Fayez of the Crass, Taldun of the Wool. We will then take a look at the sanctuaries for each faction, as well as some of their cards, and discuss how they play. Now, Nomar is the Force of the Mulren, their champion. You can tell what type of card it is by the details up here. We do have the cost of getting him into play, which is 3. His health of 5. Faction symbol right here. His attack value of 4. Down below here, we've got the attributes of this champion. He is veiled, zealous, and fierce. Fierce meaning he can only be played in attack position. Zealous means he comes into play unexhausted. And veiled means he cannot be targeted by rituals and abilities. Now, these 4 sanctuaries that we have here, the branch of the clans has the ability to veil your units in that lane. Garaneth, the First Stone, can double the damage that you deal to a unit during your attack phase. The Towering Arena will let you go through your deck during the start of your attack phase and add a card to your hand. And the Cairn of the Brave will let you pick a unit at the beginning of your attack phase, and then if it dies, give you some essence. Now we do have some of the components here. Please remember this is a prototype. So we do have the essence crystals. We have some health tokens. We do have some attribute markers that you can use when units gain some attributes. Units means your champions as well as acolytes, which we'll see in a moment. We do have a splendor tracker as well as health and damage tracker. You can see where they go by the symbols on the cards. So we've now discussed the Mulren. Let's take a quick look at some of their cards. So we have a Cunning Instructor. As you can see, he has a Genesis effect, which that symbol represents. So units on its flanks gain +1 damage till the end of the turn. It costs 0 to get into play. Now this one gains +2 for each of the units on the flanks. This is the Hammering Brotherhood, so it can be a highly damaging card. Now we've got the Hoarder of the Den. As you can see, he's veiled and also has a Genesis effect. Now just to describe a little bit about how the Mulren play. We'll take a look at this ritual here. You can choose any of your units. That unit deals damage equal to its health to any enemy. So doing 5 damage to any enemy. Great way to get rid of some champions. But as you can see, we've got a lot of fears. This symbol here represents Reaper. What that means is that it can destroy any unit, as in your unit takes damage from it, whether it's full damage or not, it gets killed. I'm sorry, I said fierce, I meant to say zealous. Another card with Reaper. You'll see this symbol here for last word, meaning that once this unit dies, it has an effect that will happen as well. And that effect is also the same as its Genesis ability. So as you can see just from the cards and our experience playing it, once again, we've got a card that's zealous with cool Genesis effects. The Mulren are the type of faction that focuses on damaging sanctuaries quickly, getting into play, and having a strong attacking position. And their champion, No More, really represents that. So let's take a look at the Crass right now. This is Fias. So what Fias does do is he costs 2. So not as expensive as No More to get into play. He has a last word effect where you may deploy 1 Acolyte from your hand, and he's more of a defensive card. You want to protect one of your sanctuaries with him as he cannot damage units. He'll be played more in a defensive position, and he's difficult to kill with 5 health. However, as you saw, the Mulren and maybe some other rituals from other factions like the Wool can defeat Fias. Now, what we have here are their 4 sanctuaries. Now, the Steaming Caves give you a hand limit of 5. The Colony Gates means at the end of your turn, you may return the first Acolyte from your discard pile to your hand. Great way to get cards back. Now, the Source of the Flow means at the end of your turn, you will gain 1 Essence. Now, my favorite one with this faction is the Deeps of Dusnia. I want to say Dune Sea. Big fan of Dune, so sorry I was misreading that. When your units are destroyed, you will resolve their last word abilities twice. So this is in play. Fias dies. Might not be a bad thing. Your champions will die while you play the game. Now let's take a quick look at some of their cards. For example, this one, you may destroy any Acolyte on the battlefield. Strong attack card, lots of health, also a high cost. Sometimes you may want to destroy some of your own cards to resolve those last word effects. That's really how this faction plays. Metempsychosis, hard to pronounce. Metamorphosis is just more common. You may destroy any Acolyte. That controller may search their deck for an Acolyte, reveal it, and add it to their hand. You've got a Voracious Warder, one of the few cards in the deck that is fierce and zealous. You've got the Blistering Rider, which will let you deal 1 damage to any sanctuary when they die. They also have Reaper, so another great card in terms of getting rid of champions. We have the Outburst Runner, who is veiled, so can't be taken out by rituals, and also has Reaper. Then with the Raging Bonds, a ritual, you may destroy any of your Acolytes to destroy another Acolyte, meaning once your Depths of Dusnia is in play, destroying an Acolyte may be something that you want to do. Now, just notice some of these target Acolytes specifically, meaning you cannot use them to destroy champions. Now, we're going to take a look at the Wool. I will not be showcasing any cards from the Wool deck, as we do not have the final art with this prototype, but I will speak to how they play. We'll start with Taldan of the Wool. So, as you can see right here, this symbol is ongoing, meaning this effect will take place at the end of each of your turns, not just once. He is veiled, has Reaper, 1 damage, 3 health, 1 to get into play. Now his ongoing effect is, at the end of your turn, if at least 3 Acolytes were put in your discard pile from anywhere, so no matter what happened, as long as it was during your turn, they ended up in the discard, you may deal 1 damage to any sanctuary. The 4 sanctuaries are the Twilight Caves, which means at the beginning of your turn, sorry, I just said the Twilight Caves, I'm going to name them all off. Twilight Caves, Dizzying Bridges, Vault of the Collectors, and the Muttering Ice Canyons. So as I was saying, the Twilight Caves, at the beginning of your turn, you may deploy any unit from your discard pile on a lane different than this one. With the Dizzying Bridges, at the beginning of your turn, you may reveal the top card of your deck, then put it in your discard pile. If If the card is an Acolyte, you will gain 1 essence. The Vault of the Collectors lets you at the beginning of your turn discard an Acolyte from your hand to deal 1 damage to any sanctuary. And then Muttering Ice Canyons means that each player at the beginning of your turn must discard a card. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff here based around discarding cards. The way that the will work is you're going to be discarding cards to trigger different effects, bring cards into play, maybe get cards from your discard pile back into play during your turn. So there you have it. We've now taken a look at the Lands of Dusk. So keep right here as we're going to be continuing on, and we will take a look at the Lands of Dawn. Now we're going to take a look at the components for the Lands of Dawn. Once again, we do get tokens that are included in this box. We do have the health tracking tokens for your sanctuaries. We have the splendor tokens. Once again, the modifier tokens. Here we've got the health tokens and some more essence crystals. For the Lands of Dawn, we have the Antar, the Thanin, and the Ganto. So let's take a look at the Antar first. We'll start with Vatep, just like the other champions that we saw for the Lands of Dusk. Health, damage, cost again to play, different attributes. So he does have an ongoing attribute that allows him to exhaust a unit. He also has Reaper, and there is his faction symbol. Now let's take a look at their sanctuaries. We have the Relic of the Eye, Port of Savlar, Palace of the Truth, and the Garden of the Five. Now the Relic of the Eye means that at the end of your turn, you may destroy any enemy acolyte that's on a lane different from this one. If an acolyte does have Veil, they cannot be targeted. For the Port of Savlar, at the end of your turn, you may return any of your units from the battlefield to your hand. Great way to get your champion away from maybe another champion that has Reaper or just a card that has Reaper. With the Palace of the Truth, at the end of your turn, you may exhaust any enemy unit in attack position on a lane different than this one. So another great way to deactivate the other player's units. But once again, veiled characters are protected. And with the Garden of the Five, your units will gain +1 damage. And that's one of the reasons why you do have this +1 damage token to help you keep track of that. Now let's take a quick look at some of the cards for the Antar. So as you can see with the Sisterhood Novice, her last word will let her exhaust any unit. Fervent Speaker will let you activate any unit, which means you can put a unit into play and then activate it so it'll go right away. We do have Untitled Sellsword, who's got Veiled and Fierce, so just some frontline attack. Engage Corruptor, who is Veiled and is Reaper. So for him, he's trying to take out some of the other units, you know, like the Champion, for example. You do have some rituals to let you exhaust units. You have this unit which will let you draw a card for each exhausted enemy unit on the plane. Pretty cool. And the Blade Dancer gains attack based on the amount of exhausted units. And lastly, Touch of the Gifted will let you activate any unit. So as you can see, the Antar are all about deactivating units that are active in order to let you go through someone's defense, because an exhausted defensive unit is essentially not active, or deactivate attacks on your sanctuaries. Now we'll move on to the Thanin. We'll start with Byrol, the Tactician of the Thanin. So on your turn, the first time you move a unit, you may deal 1 damage to any sanctuary. That's very cool ongoing ability. He is zealous, so starts ready to attack and has Reaper. I really enjoy this champion. We have the Shivering Tower, which will let you, at the end of your summoning phase, deal 2 damage to any unit. The Feather Cliffs, at the end of your summoning phase, you may move any of your units. So that's an example of how you may trigger his ability to deal 1 damage to any sanctuary. The Wellspring of Byrol, at the end of your summoning phase, put the top card of your discard pile into the bottom of your deck. Great way to replenish your deck, as if your deck's gone, it does cause some problems towards the end of the game. And Korhanen, the Floating City, increases your hand limit to 5. So your normal hand limit is 4. If you have more than 4 cards at the end of your turn, you must discard down to your hand size. This will increase it and also let you draw up to 5 cards once it's active instead of just 4. Now let's take a quick look at the types of units we have for the Thanen. So we got a Paladin of Korhanen. So at the end of your summoning phase, you may move this unit to any position. This is a very deadly unit as he can be moved around the board into different locations, whereas factions like the Antar and the Ganto cannot do that. Same goes for all the factions in the Lands of Dusk. Surefire Strike will let you destroy any Acolyte. Celebrate the Heroes will let you gain some more Essence. The Feather Initiate will let you move any of your units. Cloud Terror, who's got a last word, you may deal 1 damage to any Sanctuary. And is Zealous, who starts ready in attack position. And the Storm Precursors, they are Zealous, Fierce, and have Raper. These cards can definitely get rid of champions or deal direct damage to sanctuaries very quickly. And lastly, the Juggernaut of the Cliff is Veiled. Strong defensive card with Reaper, as well as 3 damage and 3 health. So we'll now move on to the Ganto. We'll look at Inesh Tet. And as you can see, he's got 0 attack and 4 health, so a much more defensive card. He has an ability, which is once per turn, you may either deal 1 damage to any sanctuary or repair 1 damage to any sanctuary. Now, there are no attributes here, but you can treat this as an ongoing effect because it is always in play, as it says once per turn. Now, you'll notice that he only costs 1 to get into play, and this goes with the Ganto playstyle, which is going to become self-evident as we talk about their sanctuaries. The Sentient Rocks, at the end of your turn, if the sanctuary is not at 6 health, you will gain 1 energy. The Pools of Omniscience, at the end of your turn, if the sanctuary is not at 6, you get to draw a card. We have the Hall of the Foresighted, which at the end of your turn, you may deal 1 damage to any sanctuary. And the Heart of the Swamp will let you heal 1 damage to any sanctuary. Now, we're going to take a quick look at some of the cards. Not all of the card art is finished, so you can take a look with this Vendril Roof Eater, his Genesis, so you have to do it. Deal 1 damage to each of your sanctuaries, but he's a fairly strong card and only costs 2. The Expert of Restorations, you may repair up to 2 damage on 1 of your sanctuaries. Now, the Master of Symmetry will let you deal 1 damage to any sanctuary and repair up to 1 damage on any of your sanctuaries. So as you can see, the way the Ganto work is they target a lot of damage on their own sanctuaries to trigger abilities, as well as deal damage directly to your opponent's sanctuaries, bypassing their defense as well as their minions. So you're going to have to think smart, play defensive, but they do have some cards, as we saw, just like the Ventral Root Eater, which can go on the offensive to deal direct damage. Well, not direct damage, to deal damage during your attack phase to a sanctuary. And there you have it. We've taken a look at all of the components for Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. Now keep it right here as we're going to come at you with our setup and how to play for the game. Now let's set up Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. Now what you need to do is set up your 4 sanctuaries on each side, constructing combat lanes. Now the way you set up your sanctuaries, what position they are in, it is up to you. You just have to make sure you've got 4 lanes. As you can see, you're going to have a defensive position, which is closest to the sanctuary. You'll have that on both sides. You will then also have the attacking position, which is the furthest away from the sanctuaries, once again on both sides. Each player will need to shuffle their deck and then draw a starting hand of 4 cards. So we have the Celebrate the Heroes, Raptor Tactician, Storm Precursors, as well as a Feather Initiate. So that is the starting hand for the Thanen. I'm just going to place this right here. We'll do the same for the Mulren. You also want to make sure that your champion is face up near your deck. They're not in your deck. And if they are ever defeated, they are to be placed next to your deck. However, they are placed face down, signifying that they cannot come back into the game. So just keep that in mind. Once your champion is dead, they are defeated. Now, we've shuffled up the Morin's deck. We will then draw 4 cards. So we have War of the Peaks, Mocking Hunter, Order of the Den, as well as the Hammering Brotherhood. We have also placed the health tokens at their starting position on the sanctuaries, and the Splendor token starts not at the bottom here, but at the 0 position as I had it set up on the other cards. So as you can see, we do have a sanctuary that starts in play for the Morin. Its Splendor ability is active. So there you have it. We've now set up the game. Now let's teach you how to play. Now we're going to teach you how to play Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. In order to do that, I'm going to go through 2 full turns for each of the factions, explaining the intricacies of the game. Now, on the first turn, there is a difference. The first player will only get 1 essence, whereas the second player will gain 2 essence. Now, these are going to be spent, but on the following turn, the first player would then get 2 essence, as would the second player on their following turn. So there's only a difference during that first turn. Now, let's remove all of the essence. And in this scenario, also a little bit based on their cards, and I'm trying to teach the game, we're going to start with the Thanon. So we will start with only 1 essence. And let's take a look at their hands of cards. So we do have a Feather Initiate. We have some Storm Precursors, a Raptor Tactician, as well as Celebrate the Heroes. We want to get cards into play as quickly as possible. Now I'm going to set up my discard actually just over here. So that is my discard pile. We're going to spend this 1 energy, essence, to gain 2 essence. I'm just not going to get rid of 1. So I spent 1. I now have 2. And what I'm going to do is pay 1 essence to now put Byral into play. And I want to be attacking this sanctuary that will let the Morin gain energy, as they're an energy heavy faction, but they can hit very hard. So that is now put into play. And you know what? I have a card that can do more damage to it, the Storm Precursors. So I'll actually set it up. Well, he'll be over here, as I find that this is a little more annoying, but I'm going to start him off in the defensive position. Might not make sense right away, but don't worry, you'll see. As you notice, he's zealous, so he does not enter into play exhausted. Now, I will spend my other 1 essence to put the Storm Precursors into play on the offensive against the Cairn of the Brave. And I do also have my Raptor Tactician, which will allow me to move any unit. I do want to protect some of these. I love the fact that I'm able to maneuver a unit. So I believe, this is the top card of my deck. So the one that lets me maneuver a unit is the Feathered Cliffs. So we put him into play and he will enter into play exhausted, but he does let me move any unit. I can now slide Byral up into attack position, and as he moved, I trigger his ongoing effect, dealing 1 damage to any sanctuary. Now, as I really want to get rid of this Cairn of the Brave, I'm going to deal damage to that. Now, my Feather Initiate, I have out of essence. I cannot play him, so he's going to remain in my hand. Now, notice that none of these are active, so I cannot do any abilities. We now enter into the attack phase. Now, as I've placed cards, they are at the ready. They are ready to attack. I'm going to deal damage to the opposing sanctuaries. So we deal 1 damage to the branch of the clans, and we deal 2 damage to the Cairn of the Brave. Now, don't forget that this game is supposed to be played within 15 to 30 minutes, so the ability to do a lot of damage early on and off the bat is a normal part of the game. Now we're going to the end of the turn where we will unexhaust all of our units. We will then move the Splendor track up. Sorry, this one got moved. So we should be at 1, 1, and 1. Now once a Splendor track is moved up, it does become active. So if you've got abilities that say at the end of your turn and it was 0 to 1, they are active at your first end of turn. You don't need to wait to the next turn. They immediately become active because after this step, you will resolve all your end of turn effects. We currently do not have any. As our turn is now completed, we will then draw up to our hand size, which is 4. We'll add 3 more cards to our hand, and it is now the Morin's turn. So we're going to move over to the other side. We will gain 2 energy, and we'll need to take a look at our situation and what we can do in order to maybe take out this champion, defend our Karen the Brave. Now we don't have a lot of energy. Ideally, we definitely want to get Nomar into play, so we have to play smart. Fortunately, the Roar of the Peaks only has 1 life, so she can't do too much damage. She is veiled though, but we do have the Mocking Hunter here, who I do like, as he does have 3 health. We can use him to defend. We can also use her attacking ability as well. So there's some interesting things that we can do. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to spend 1 essence to place the Mocking Hunter into play. Exhausted. And we don't have any cards that will start active. But we do have the Roar of the Peaks. And I may or may not have done this normally, but I'm going to put him into play because it does let me showcase a Genesis ability. So we're going to play the card. She's exhausted, but we will deal 1 damage to all enemy units on the line. Unfortunately, it didn't work the way I hoped. I thought the Raptor Tactician actually had only 1 health, but you know what? It's a good example for this, how to play. So each of these would take a damage. Now, you might be thinking that's a good thing, but at the end of the attack phase, all this damage gets healed. So all of it gets healed back up, which means there's not much of a point to playing this card. Now we could look at playing her on defense. Now one way to maybe stop Pyro or defend another one of our things would be to put this Hammering Brotherhood into play. But I want to get Nomar into play. I want to showcase his power. So we're going to take back that 1 energy that I spent for the Roar of the Peaks. And you know what? We're just going to end our turn. We've got a card into play defensively. So now they would unexhaust to become active. We're skipping over the attack phase. None of my abilities are in effect for that attack phase. So we will slide down our Splendor. And then we would move back over to the Thanon. Now, as it's the Thanon's 2nd turn, they will draw. Well, not draw, they will get into Essence. And we'll take a look at what we have here. We have a lot of pretty cool things that we're able to do. Now we've got some more Storm Precursors, and maybe you want to do some direct damage to a Sanctuary and move some stuff around. So we will definitely spend 1 energy, and we're going to play a Feather Initiate. We'll play him into play here. Now we're going to move our Storm Precursors over here. That'll set off his ability, dealing 1 damage. And as you can see, we've now defeated his Sanctuary, so we flip it face down. Now we still have an energy, so we may actually put another character into play, and debating on who I'd like to put into play. Well, I want to show what would happen. Now this is not a smart move, but I'm going to do it anyway in order to just discuss some of the abilities. So we're going to put a Storm Precursor into play on offense, and they're active because of Zealous. And they can only be played attacking because of Fierce. So now we will go to our end of the summoning phase. And what you'll notice here is that we may deal 2 damage to any unit. So that's actually a good thing. We can deal 2 damage. Oh, that's the wrong token. 2 damage to this unit. Now this is at the end of your summoning phase. I can take the top card of my discard pile and place it back at the bottom of my deck, which I will do. Now at the end of the summoning phase, I may move a player into any position just to show, well, move any of my units. Just to show that I can do it, I will move the Raptor Tactician. Now one thing to notice with this card, its ability does say move any unit, meaning I could move a Mocking Hunter if I played it during this turn, not last turn. Well, I'm going to move him over here. I'd rather protect the Shivering Tower. And this one is not in play. So now we resolve our attack phase. 1 damage is dealt to the branch of the clans. Now, the Storm Precursors will now defeat the Mocking Hunter as he already has 2 damage on him. But the reason why I placed them here is because what I want to show you is that if this card was not here and you're attacking a destroyed Sanctuary, the player then must discard the top card of the deck. So that's what happens when a Sanctuary is defeated and you still have attackers there. Deck depletion is a valid way to win the game. At this point, what would then happen is that they would cancel each other out because he has got 2 damage. He would die. Now he only does 1 damage, but he has Reaper, defeating the Storm Precursors and placing this Mocking Hunter into the Morin's discard pile. You also must deal 2 damage to Sanctuary. This card is now active, unexhausted, as we are now going to the end phase. I do not have any end of turn effects, so I'll now just advance my cards. And realizing quickly I did make a mistake, so the Feather Cliffs was not active, meaning I could not have moved my Raptor Tactician. So you'll see that pop up on the how to play video that I did make a quick mistake there, which is good to show you that pay attention to all your sanctuaries and the phases that they trigger, as there's a lot of stuff going on in the game and you can make a mistake if you're not careful. So we've now ended our turn. We will then draw 2 cards and we've got our full hand. Now we're going to go over to the Morin. We gain 2 energy. Take a look at what we have, and I neglected to draw up to my hand size, so this is the correct hand size. Now the best play that I do have is going to be to take Nomar and get him into play. And as you can see, he is highly aggressive. Veiled can't be targeted. There's nothing else that I can do. So we're going to go right into the attack phase, and I just straight up annihilate the Shivering Tower. Because it takes 4 damage, it has 4 health, so it is now out of play. And we're going to our end of turn phase. So end of turn phase, we'll advance everything. Now, these abilities would all come into play. Also, I'm able to now look at my hand. If I do not like these cards, I can discard cards. Now, these Hoarder of Dens are good, but they're hard to get into play right now, especially with this off the board. I can discard both of them in order to let myself draw more cards. As you can see, having cards that are worth 0 can really make a big difference. And we started this game with a lot of cards that cost a fair bit, which does make it difficult to get going. But as you'll notice, getting no more into play, we're sort of back in the game, despite the fact that they have a lot more health on their sanctuaries. You still got to kill destroy all the sanctuaries in order to win the game. So there you have it. That's how you're going to be playing Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. Just wanted to give you an overview as to how the game plays. As you can see, what you're going to draw, it's going to make a big difference in your strategy. And sometimes your opponents, in this case the Thanon, may get pretty much exactly what they need to really deal a lot of damage early on in the game. The trick of this game is both sides are very asymmetrical. They play incredibly differently, and to adapt your strategy to beat the other player. Now, with that being said, Julie and I are going to talk to you as we preview the game and go into more depth about each of the factions and our experiences with the game. Now we're going to start previewing Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. Now, as this is a preview video, we're going to start by talking about the factions. Then we're going to discuss our experiences with the game. Just a reminder, in case you skipped ahead, this is a paid Kickstarter preview, so we have been compensated for this video. Now, with that being said, let's get into it. So, Julie, let's talk a little bit about the different factions in Sanctuary of the Keeper's Era. I started out with the Lands of Dawn. You started out with the Lands of Dusk. Then we switched. So we've each played the factions that we have in the game. And why don't we start with a faction you probably spent the most time with, the Morin, which are the Lions.
I was going to say, that's probably my favorite faction. It's a fairly straightforward faction to play. It's high on the fight, basically, in the combat, and you just basically try to beat up your enemy as quickly as possible.
Yes, and they have some nice abilities, being able to be veiled so that they can't be targeted by enemies' abilities or rituals. The one thing I would say, and it goes with the balancing element because the game is highly asymmetrical, no faction plays alike, is that they are very essence heavy.
Yep.
If you don't get a lot of essence, you can find yourself stalling out fairly early on. But that's part of the game. You need to use your strategy and your cards to compensate for it.
They're also not mobile. There's not a lot of cards. There are very few cards that allow you to move anything. And because they cost a lot, you want to try to be able to use them. But they can get, depending on which faction you're playing, they can get stuck where they are.
Yeah, well, to be fair, there is only one faction that's mobile. I think it's a good segue to talk about them, which is the Thanon, the Dragons. Now, they are highly mobile, and while other factions will have ways to get rid of cards that may be clogging up certain lanes where you want another faction, it's definitely not present in the Morin.
They were fun to play as well. They allow they're also fairly straightforward and allow for a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of different rituals and things basically that allow you to, correct or compensate for things happening on the battlefield. So that was a lot of fun as well. Now I have to say those two factions were probably my favorite art as well. They're the happiest, I guess we'd say, the least creepy. So for me, those were my favorites when it came to artwork. There's some of the lion ones. I'm going to keep calling them lions and dragons. There's a couple of the lion ones that were pretty impressive art.
No, and I really like the art throughout all of the game. The sanctuaries are absolutely beautiful, and that goes for all the factions. As Julie said, some of them are a little bit more on that creepy side, but you know what? That actually works. I do like the art as well for
I didn't say it didn't work. It's just to be consistent with what I've said throughout the entire existence of our channel, I like light and bright artwork, and those two were light and bright, and I really appreciated them. I'm not saying I didn't appreciate the others. They're just creepy for my taste.
Yes, no. So sorry to say we liked all the art. Now going back to talking about the Thanon, they are definitely highly mobile. Their advantage is they are also low cost. There isn't too many high cost cards in their deck. Their champion does have some nice also direct attack powers, meaning if you're going for a counter, you really want to try to get rid of their mobility because that is how their whole deck is played. Now, what does come into play when you're playing the Thanon, the Morin, or any other faction, I think you'll agree with me before we start talking about the others, is that like a regular card game, whether it's poker or you're playing Magic the Gathering, your starting hand can have a large effect on your strategy and your effectiveness when you're playing the game. Now, I play a lot of Hearthstone. I play it on a regular basis. So I'm definitely used to seeing like situations where someone is essentially top decking, where they're getting their best draws, and I'm start getting okay draws, and then you got to turn it around. But that's part of the challenge of the game. There are definitely rituals as well as abilities on your sanctuaries that can help flip it in another direction. But targeting specific sanctuaries, and one of the reasons I'm mentioning it now with the Thanon, is they are very mobility based. If you get rid of their sanctuary that lets them move things around, you can really limit their power early on.
Yeah, or the one that allows to do damage on any sanctuary as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say it can be very, very hard or near impossible. One of the times that we've played, I just wasn't getting any of the cards that I needed. Basically, you know, when you're pulling all rituals, there's not much you can do as well. So that's part of playing a card game.
No, exactly. It's not a critique about the game. It's just how it works. And one thing I would say, and I think we'd both agree, if this wasn't designed to be played in 15 to 30 minutes, it's the kind of thing that I would list as a negative. But as the game plays very quickly in a situation like that, you can move on to the next game, and it's probably not going to happen again. And all of our plays of the game, and we're probably at about like 16 plays of this, I think it's happened like twice. So there was a lot of balance throughout all the decks.
So what's the next faction you want to talk about?
So let's see. I think we should talk about the Antar. Now, the Antar are from the Land of Dawn, and they are probably the other faction that is very straightforward, and they're the ones that let you exhaust other units.
Yes, very frustrating to play against. It's a different tactic that you have to take when you're playing against them. It may be straightforward to play, but it is definitely adds some complexity when you are playing against them, and that's part of the game, right?
Yes, when you're playing against that faction, a lot of the abilities such as rituals and things that will let you do direct damage, ways to reactivate units are things that you have to keep in mind as they come into play. And I would say that if you're playing against the Antar as their champion, has the ability to exhaust units, he is almost enemy number one, and you want to get rid of him as fast as possible. But that being said, their weakness is they don't have a lot of hard-hitting upfront cards, so you can develop a strategy. On the first couple of plays, I would say that we felt that they were fairly powerful, but as we kept playing the game, we were able to develop some strategies to counter them.
Okay.
Yes.
I think you've said it all. I don't think there's anything to add there.
Yes. And next we'll talk about a very interesting faction, and probably I think the one that we would both agree is maybe the most complex would be the Wool faction, which is the one where you are going to be discarding cards, pulling cards out of your discard pile, and really having to manage sort of your hand as well as discarding things.
Yeah, that one definitely adds complexity, because one of the things that I'm presuming you went through in the how to play is that you lose if you go through your entire deck of cards.
No, we did not go through that in the how to play. The how to play was strictly about how to play the game.
Okay.
We did not get into the loss conditions such as what would happen if you ran out of cards in your deck. I figured we would save that for this part of the video.
Okay, well, there you go. So if you run out of cards by the beginning of your turn, if you don't have cards to draw from, you have to destroy a sanctuary, basically. So you don't lose automatically, but you're coming close, or you could end up killing yourself.
Yes. Now, the one reason why we're talking about that now with the Wolf faction is as you're going to be discarding cards, we had a very close game, I would say. It really ended on the last turn. If I wasn't defeated, it was going to be me defeating her. She had the right cards and was able to take me out, and then it became the start of my turn. I actually had no cards left. I had to destroy my last sanctuary. So I know that when we had a discussion about this, deck depletion is a very important and valid strategy. Now, I did talk about that during the how to play, and I mentioned it. We didn't go through just how destructive it can be, but it's something that you really need to take into consideration, because if you're getting people, well, your opponent, discarding some of their best cards that will come into play in key situations and just running through their deck a lot faster, you could be in a situation where it looks like you might be losing, but all of a sudden they have no cards left. You've got all your defense on your last sanctuary, and they're starting to destroy their sanctuaries. So I know that's not like your favorite strategy in the game, but well, she just likes beating me, kicking my butt. It's one of her favorite things.
That's what you like to do too. So
yes, and it doesn't always feel like victory, but I would say that if that's the way you feel about it, get over it. Deck depletion is really important in this game.
That's why there's also some factions that have the ability to cycle cards back into their deck or from their discard pile, or back into their hand. Sorry, not into their hand or into their deck. Sorry.
Yes. So specifically with the rule, we'll now continue talking about the faction. How it works is you'll play cards that will often require you to discard cards from your hand. You'll then be able to generate extra resources, extra essence, or even put back into play some of your strongest cards that were just maybe discarded or killed back over the Reaper, which can definitely be frustrating when you're on the other side. You're like, yes, I got rid of their big card, and then the next turn, it is right back staring you in the face.
As long as that Sanctuary is still active.
As long as that Sanctuary is still active, or you played the right ritual, or you've got the right card. And the interesting thing about it is we were talking earlier with the Thanon about mobility. Well, they don't have any mobility, but the ability to discard and replay cards does give them sort of a sense of mobility. You might need a big card for defense. It gets killed. Next thing you know, it's back into play on offense, which is why I think they are probably one of the most complex factions to play.
Mm-hmm.
Now we'll talk about the Ganto. Now, you probably don't remember the name of these guys, but these are another one that when I first played it, you did not enjoy playing against me, but you quite enjoyed it yourself. They are the faction that has the direct attack on the sanctuaries.
Yes. Yeah. So that one, I mean, it's also another different way to play because you really are just planning on, how to directly attack the other factions, and you have to balance being able to damage your own sanctuaries in order to damage other sanctuaries, which is a little counterintuitive in my case.
Yes, but there are a lot of cards that let you repair your sanctuaries, but it's definitely a balance. It was quite frustrating when I was playing against Sarah, and I know exactly how she felt when Sanctuary was down to 1. You let it get there, and then the next turn you're like, oh, it's back up to full health, and now I'm doing all of this stuff.
It was also frustrating, though, like in the way, and again, this is a card game, right? A lot of my powerful cards that allowed me to repair sanctuaries came up early in the game when I didn't have any damage in my sanctuaries, and I wasn't really getting them at the end of the game when I needed them more. So that's a luck of the draw.
Yep, and it happened in one of our plays where I needed a card to activate another card, and I couldn't get it. And then, of course, it came up at the end, and I was like, man, if I had that earlier, it would have just let me activate one of my very hard-hitting cards early to, bam, just take out one of your sanctuaries.
Luck of the draw.
Yes. So we now have our last 2 factions to talk about. So we're going to talk about the Crass. Now, I gotta say, they might be my favorite faction in terms of how they play because I find it very interesting. And they are the ones that are the light green faction instead of the dark green one. They're the ones with the last word effects and the ability to double trigger certain last word effects. Mm-hmm. So what did you think about playing them? You played them first, actually.
Yeah, they're not... that one was a little more complicated for me to wrap my brain around because of the way they came up. And it takes a little bit more planning, I find. But they were good. They were okay.
They were okay. I don't know. I think I had a lot of fun with them.
Different styles of playing.
Mm-hmm. It is. So the interesting thing about the Crass is they do have a lot of hard-hitting cards. There are even cards that will let you destroy your own cards. So you really have to build everything around triggering the last word effects. But they can leave some weaknesses in your play because sometimes you've got to be like, oh, well, I really want to double trigger this. It might be your best move, or you can get your board clogged up, which is really not good when you're playing against the Ganto that are just hitting things directly behind your defense.
It's also hard when you pick up cards that make you do last rites when you don't want to, or death rattles or whatever. So when you're picking up those cards and that's all you have in your hand, it kind of, it was a little counterintuitive for me.
No, and I understand that. I just like the idea of the way they play. I think it's very fun and intricate. But It's also not the easiest, and I think if we are going to just talk a little bit about the game, why don't we just sort of organize the factions into how we think they play, like
Well,
in
why don't we
terms of
talk about
complexity?
the last one, and then we can do that.
Well, we've gone over all of them so
Okay.
far because we've covered the. So let's go through it just to make sure we haven't missed anything. So for the Lands of Dawn, we have the Antar, the Thanin, and it is the Ganto. So yes, we went over those three factions. And then for the Lands of Dusk, we had the Morin, the Wool, and the Crass. So yes, we've gone over all 6 factions. So, and you've made me lose my train of thought.
You were going to talk about the complexity of each.
Yeah,
of
so
them.
let's read the complexity of each faction. Now that you got the nice listing, I knew it all went together. This is why you get some nice unscripted banter between the two of us. Who would you say, and this is going to be your perspective, who's the most complex, and then sort of go down the list. You don't have to use the faction names.
I was going to say, if you're asking me a faction name, I can't remember those. I really think it was the one that you have to discard.
So the Wool faction.
Yeah.
And I would have to agree. I think the Wool are the most complex and definitely I think the most challenging to play. Afterwards, what would be your number 2? I'm wondering if we have the same list. We might.
I probably using the last rights, the death rattle.
Yeah, the last word.
That one's kind of complex to use, but I'd say also though the other way around. I think the one where basically you're exhausting everything all the time is hard to play against. I would put it the next one. It's also hard. It's probably a middle of the road to play, but it's really hard to play against.
No, and I would agree with you. I think that's definitely the proper order. I would say that you're going to find the Crass is the second most difficult because you really need to pay attention to the last word effects. Sorry if she said death rattle. I play a lot of Hearthstone, like I mentioned. That's what those types of effects are called in a card game that I spent probably way too much time playing. And then the Antar, definitely their exhausting effects are one of the things that are also a little bit complex for the other players because you have to make sure that, veiled cards, as we talked about in the how to play and through the components, are protected from things like that. So you need to keep that in mind. So I would say that those are definitely the 3 more complex factions. I'd say all the other ones are a little bit easier in terms of place. I wouldn't really go with a ranking on them. I would say I do think personally, and you may agree with me, I think the Thanin is by far the easiest faction to play.
That was the Lions?
The dragons, with moving things around and with the low cost cards.
Because I was going to say that now we've ended up pretty much ranking them though, but I think the Lions you have to plan because you can get stuck with your big cards and not be able to move them at all.
No. So we've talked about the factions. Now let's talk about our experiences with the game. Now, this is a highly competitive game. You're going to be attacking each other. It's very
adversarial.
It is very adversarial, and it is a card game, meaning that it is bolstered by the strengths of that type of game, but also does suffer from some of the simple weaknesses like we've discussed. Now, if you are a fan of games like Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, and you're looking for a game to get to the table before everyone shows up for game night, I think this is definitely the exact game that you are looking for, especially with the Kickstarter edition. We're going to get the extra solo mode, which will add replayability to it, getting some nice game mats for it as well. I don't think you're going to be able to go wrong if that's something that you're missing from your collection, especially as you don't need to make decks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything else to add to that except to say if you know that that's not your cup of tea, then this might not be the right game for you. But if you like it, it does well.
No, and the one thing I think that we realized going through the game, especially for first-time players, is you might find it taking a little bit. Apologies for the quick fade. We are back in the land of Elnerth. We ran out of essence, and now we're going to continue our discussion. So I will toss it over to Julie, who was talking about her experiences and the time it was taking to play the game.
Yes, so I was going to blame it a little bit on my paralysis.
Analysis paralysis?
Or decision paralysis, analysis paralysis. I took probably way too long trying to analyze and try to honestly, try to get inside this head to figure out because I know the way he plays, he's always like 4 steps ahead or 4, and I was trying to figure out, well, what would he do with this, and if he was, and so our games definitely lasted more than 30 minutes. Jason had a couple times where he took a long time to decide as well, and I think that's part of the complexity as well, and trying to figure out the different factions.
Yes, and I also think one of the issues that we had when we were playing the game is that new players should look at both sets of faction cards. You really need to go through the cards, have an idea as to what your opponent's going to be playing, because if you're going to just be getting surprised by it, I don't think you're going to have as good of a first play. That's just a recommendation that we have after 15 plays.
Also, I mean, the sanctuaries are hard, even if they're hard to read what they do, and they can, unless you remember what they do, it's hard to target which one you want to take out first. So I think it's important to know what your opponent's targets sanctuaries do as well.
Yes. Now, with that being said, I think we've wrapped up our very detailed preview of Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. Julie, is there anything that you'd like to add to our discussion on the game?
No, I don't think so. I think, honestly, what I would recommend if you do get it, make sure you play all the different factions. I think it's important to get they're all different. Unless you're you're beginner, then I'd say start with the easier ones. But I think it's fun to try them all.
No, and you really get to appreciate a lot of the design work that was done in the game, because nothing plays similarly from one faction to the other. They're all very distinct, and that's something that I've got to say, a lot of games, they're not really able to often get right. You might get some minor differences in the factions or differences in the characters, but they still feel sort of samey at the core. In the case of Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era, it does not whatsoever.
And I think you'll get, if you're playing with the same person, you'll get to have some factions that you like to play head-to-head against, because I think they don't all play equally against one another, and some are definitely more fun to play. Maybe they're more balanced, or their styles are more compatible, that it's easier to play, or not easier, more fun to play together, or against each other, I should say.
No, and that makes sense coming from playing a lot of Hearthstone and other card games. There are certain decks that my decks would wreck. It's just not even a question. While there are others that I'm like, oof, this is going to be a long, hard fight. And if I get the right sequence, it's going to be my victory. If it doesn't go my way, it's just going to be a bloodbath. And you do get a little bit of that in Sanctuary, but I do think that every faction has a chance to win if you get the luck of the draw and you plan out the right strategy. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, what time is it now, Julie?
Well, it's time to like, comment, subscribe.
Yep. Hit the notification bell so that YouTube will let you know when our next video will be released. Also,
down below, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, we've got it all. Jason posts pictures all the time.
Yeah, so you can definitely see pictures of Sanctuary. Not all the factions, well, most of them, just maybe not up close to the ones that we don't have final art for. Also, stay tuned. We will be doing a full review of Sanctuary once we get the Kickstarter version of the game. We will also be talking about the solo mode. Now, will it be Julie and myself, or will it be me and someone else? Who knows? You've heard a lot of our opinions already. It might be good to get a little bit of a fresh perspective.
Yep.
So now what do we need to do?
Grab our drinks.
Are we best friends again? We're no longer competitors?
We better be. We're going to keep playing games.
We're going to keep playing games. Really looking forward to the final Kickstarter version of this. Really want to see this with the playmats and the solo mode. I'm fascinated.
And the final live work on the ones we didn't get to see artwork on.
Yes, really enjoyed the art. Looking forward to it.